Thank you. This is bright. Hi. Okay, my name's Annabel, and I'm a coffeeaholic. I've been going by the name Dr. Coffee for quite some time. It's my online handle. It's how Ashley found me, I think. I have a little coffee business here in Regina, and as you might be able to notice by the accent, I'm from Britain originally, and I had a coffee shop over there. And interestingly, after all the stories we've heard this evening, my first cafe had an in-house burlesque troupe. And by the way, Joel, my stage name was Carla. That's not true. Anyway, there is a whole world of backstory on how I became quite so obsessed with coffee, but we'll save that for another night. For now, I'll have to ask you to suspend your disbelief and accept the fact that I was doing a PhD project about the coffee industry. So I really am Dr. Coffee. I spent 5 long years studying this. Originally, the plan was, for my thesis, I was going to look at ideas of quality in the coffee industry. And it's a fascinating topic because how you define quality really depends on who you're talking to and what they do in the coffee industry. So I spent far too long sitting in extremely expensive coffee shops, people watching, and in those sort of places, high quality coffee means an expensive price tag and really nice leather sofas to sit on while you pose with your cup. And I went to barista championships and I watched people in bow ties, always very good looking people, and their idea of quality was to make it beautiful and draw patterns in milk on the top. And then I learned all about fair trade certifications and what constitutes organic farming and what the little frog means on the Rainforest Alliance logo. And if you talk to marketing people, quality coffee means something with a lot of labels on it. And then I found myself in northern Nicaragua, in the cloud forests, and I was surrounded by tropical plants and giant armadillos and socialist revolutionaries and occasionally active volcanoes. And it was a complete world away from my posh London coffee shops. And I didn't even intend to end up there. I thought Brazil was where most of the world's coffee comes from, so I was going to head to Brazil. And I was going to go and do all my anthropological field work and talk to local people and get a real idea of it. And then I thought, I can't speak Portuguese. I would not have stood a chance at actually interviewing people and getting the data I needed in a language I couldn't speak. But I could speak Spanish, and luckily there are plenty of coffee-producing countries that speak Spanish. And I chose Nicaragua mainly because I'd been there before. In my undergrad, in my early days of university, I fell in with the wrong crowd. The wrong crowd being the Revolutionary Communist Party. So my first trip to Nicaragua was actually in 2003 with the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign, who were going out there to do good things because it was the 25th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. And I had an amazing experience, and I can't tell you anything about it because I really hadn't got the foggiest idea what I was doing or what was going on around me. But I did fall a little in love with Nicaragua, so I resolved 5 years prior to this that I was definitely going to go out there again if I ever had the chance. So the coffee project came along, and I got the chance, so I went to Nicaragua again. And I ended up in the northern highlands, sort of volcanoes all around you, and this sprawling city in the middle called Matagalpa. And it's a very long way off the tourist trail. So it was a genuine experience. And I found a little cafe, and it had excellent coffee in it. And I started talking to the owner, who took one look at me and thought, we don't get many strangers in here. She must be interesting. And turns out she was looking for a lodger. So I moved in with her and her husband Henry, and they had this wonderful old colonial building which was open in the middle, like a courtyard, and then rooms on around the edge, and the courtyard in the middle had her washing hanging up most of the time, and then she hosted women's groups seemingly every other day, and there was always loads of people going in and out. And I had a little room to myself, and I had running water, I had a semi-reliable electricity supply, I could use the kitchen, and by Nicaraguan standards, that was living the high life. Now, all through my academic life, I'd subscribed to this theory by my supervisor, Michael Carruthers. Look him up, he's an interesting guy. He said that to do anthropology and to write ethnography, you have to make the familiar strange and make the strange familiar. So it's a way of really analysing and being aware of the lens that you look through the world with, and being aware of your own position in regards to how you're looking at everybody else, which is a really interesting way of living, really. So I tried my best to do this, and in my little, quite well-off part of town, and in my nice little apartment with Emma, I wasn't really in the strange. So I tried to get a bit more weird. I tried to go out and find a completely new experience, and I started talking to the local coffee cooperative, and they arranged for me to go and stay with an actual coffee farming family right out in the middle of nowhere, halfway up a mountain. So I went out there, and it was called La Corona, as in the crown on top of the hill, and I was staying with a family called the Caños Salgadas, and there was 12 of them, headed up by Maximina and Bernabe, and their many, many, many offspring. And somehow they managed to spare me a little cot, and I had a nice mosquito net over it, and I was going to stay there. And every morning I got used to getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning with Maximina, and she would pound maize and make tortillas for everybody, and we had breakfast at sunrise. And then her husband would depart with some of the sons and go and push cattle around, and the eldest daughter would shove the rest of the kids down the hill to the school and then look after her own baby. And then that left me with the kind of 8 to 10-year-olds who thought I was absolutely ridiculous because they were going to go out and pick coffee, and they loaded me up with a basket like tied round your waist to put the coffee beans in, the coffee cherries, and I couldn't balance it. And of course they were absolutely expert at this, and I was just like this giant buffoon wandering around dropping things. And I gelled with them mainly because I was the best form of entertainment they'd seen in a long time. And so we did that, and then we got all this coffee in, and we had to be very careful to only pick the red ones, and they really showed me exactly what coffee farming really was. And then we got back and we unloaded all the beans, and Bernabe got his, it's called a dispolpadore. It's a hand crank machine that you squish the fruit in and the beans come out and the fruit is left over. It's very sticky and it stinks. And then after that, they're all spread out on these raised beds to dry in the sun. And they left their 5-year-old, who was called Guadalupe, which I thought was a beautiful name, and she was in charge of making sure the chickens didn't get into the coffee. And then in the evening, we all trooped up the hill to the neighbouring farm, and they had this tiny TV set, and it was hooked up to a car battery, and we used to watch the terrible melodramatic Mexican telenovelas, and I got seriously invested with the tragic romance of Soledad and Arturo, and I was really sad to leave this. But I sort of got into the habits of this, and I was starting to make this very strange circumstance my version of familiar, and disaster struck. And I got really, really sick. And it wasn't through the dirty water, it wasn't through food poisoning or anything else you kind of expect living in those circumstances. It was through flying demons from hell, otherwise known as mosquitoes. And there's a lot of them, and I knew there was going to be a lot of them because the cloud forest is very hot, it's very humid, there's lots of fruit everywhere, and there's lots of standing water, which is basically what we were bathing in. So they were everywhere, and I had my mosquito net, which I slept under, and I was even taking anti-malarial tablets because I got that paranoid when I was reading the Lonely Planet guide before I left. There hadn't been malaria in Nicaragua in 26 years, but never mind, I took them anyway. Unfortunately, it was also dengue fever, and I never even heard of dengue fever. Dengue is, it's a virus, it's similar to malaria, and it's carried by mosquitoes. And there's no vaccine against it, there's no preventative measures you can take other than avoiding getting bitten, and there's no cure. So even worse, the mosquitoes that carry dengue fever come out during the day, so even though I was sleeping under a net, there was no hope. I'm also extremely prone to getting bitten. I even get tortured by the flying things here because I'm just so gosh darn attractive. Anyway, so I got bitten by one of these things and I contracted dengue fever, and I have never felt so sick before or since. And I had a 9.5-pound baby, right? It was worse than that. And I was in this hammock and I had diarrhea, I was vomiting everywhere, and those are really not good things to have when you have no running water and you have to use a latrine. And I got so ill that I was crying, and I felt like a complete idiot because this was not something I'd anticipated, and I felt stupid that I couldn't cope with it. I felt really sick, and I felt terrible because I kept saying, I want to go home, to this family who had taken me in and were absolutely amazing. I felt like I was running away from them. I felt like a complete anthropological failure because I was quitting after like a week. And I was 26 years old, and I wanted my mum. I was that ill. I felt like I was totally alone in this completely strange circumstances, and I didn't know what to do, and I was really scared. And it got to the point where I was so sick I couldn't stand, and Bernabe, the father of the family, just must have realized that I wasn't going to get any better if I stayed in this hammock. So he borrowed his neighbour's truck and somehow loaded me in the back of the truck and drove me all the way back down to the city. And I don't remember this at all. I think I passed out in the back of the truck, but the next thing I knew, I was in bed at Emma's house, and she was fussing over me, and I was okay. And Emma, being amazing, sort of had Googled it or something. This was 2008, so I'm not sure if she Googled it or what, but she'd managed to find these bright blue giant tablets, which apparently the pharmacist had told her would stop me throwing up. And I was in no condition to argue, so I just took them. And she also had read somewhere that papaya is supposed to cleanse your stomach. So she gave me a papaya-only diet for like a week. And that's not fun either. But she also spread the words, and again, maybe my husband sitting up there can tell you exactly how she spread the word, because I don't know. But I got a phone call from my supervisor from the university in the UK, and he said, over a crackly international line, of all the people I've sent on fieldwork, Annabel, you are the one I was going to worry about the least. Don't prove me wrong. I was like, thank you. Anyway, so I stayed in bed for a week, and I took these blue tablets, and I just about started to feel human again. And I heaved myself out of bed and got down to the internet cafe, which is still using dial-up. And I was talking to my husband on Instant Messenger and trying to tell him that I was actually fine, don't worry. And I felt something drip down my leg. And I looked down, and I'd had this rash. As soon as the fever cleared, you get a rash, and it was all over, and it felt like, it's kind of like getting tattooed, actually, that sort of prickly feeling. And anyway, my knee had spontaneously started bleeding, and I had blood dripping down my leg. And it was surreal, because I looked down, and it didn't look like my leg. And I couldn't feel anything other than the drip sensation. And I went back to the guidebooks and looked up what dengue is supposed to do. And dengue, it sort of thins your blood and it stops it coagulating. So if you get a tiny cut or whatever, it takes ages to heal. And that's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. When I had my daughters, I had the midwife standing by with blood transfusions just in case, you know. I was fine, still here. But it's a really surreal experience. So after that, I got scared again, even though I was not feeling sick anymore. And I basically moved into Emma's shower, and I just sat under running water for as long as I could get away with, really. Just trying to feel clean, because nothing feels clean in Nicaragua. Everything's dusty, everything's really, really hot, and I had extremely limited clothes with me anyway. So I lived in the shower, and after 2 or 3 days of that, I thought, you know what, I'm really hungry, because I'd lost a lot of weight, I'd lost a lot of fluids, I hadn't eaten properly for nearly 2 weeks, and I went down to Emma's cafe, and everybody in the cafe, all the regulars, had kind of noticed that I wasn't there for a while. And I'm fairly sure Emma had told this story far more dramatically than I was capable of. But they were all like, you're back, this is great. And I ordered the biggest, most calorific meal I could find, which was deep-fried plantain topped with deep-fried fresh cheese, wrapped in like a kind of drain cover sized tortilla, and then you get to dunk it in red bean sauce. And anyway, it's amazing, but it will fill you up for a week. And I ordered this, and the next thing I know, this trio of mariachi players comes into the cafe. And I'd met them before. They're the sort of people that they can actually play music pretty well, but they play it very, 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 very close. So they usually harassed people in the cafe until Emma got cross with them, or until someone paid them to go away. And they always used to take requests. And because I'm an awkward little soul and I have to put up with this on a regular basis living with Emma, I had started requesting random metal and screamo songs to see if they could play them, and just cause trouble. Anyway, because they hadn't seen me for 3 weeks, there was obviously some preparation that had gone into this, because they said, you're back, and they started playing One by Metallica, mariachi style, in a language that they didn't speak, and it was absolutely amazing. And they kind of achieved the impossible, because from that moment on, I was like, you know what, I feel better. And I looked at Emma, and she was sitting in the corner waving a coffee pot at me, and her husband was sitting at the bar with this massive cigarette that he didn't enjoy smoking, he just sat there with cigars. And all these people, and then this mad trio of guys with tiny guitars trying to play Metallica. And this is my life now. This is how you make the strange very familiar, because in that moment, the utter surrealness of it was exactly what I needed to feel back on my feet, to feel human again. And I was not going to let something like dengue fever or horrible mosquitoes stop all the mad adventures that were yet to come in Nicaragua. So I carried on. And that's my story. Thank you.